All right, for part 2 here, we're going to take a look at several other systems in your small engine. And we're going to roll through this fairly quickly, but understand that understanding parts of an engine really comes when you start tearing things apart and looking at them physically. It is not easy to go through and look and identify the parts and remember them when you're just doing it on a screen or a piece of paper. So. Alright, so the fuel system is basically, you want it to provide your fuel-air mixture, your atomized fuel, so that you have proper combustion and complete combustion as possible within the cylinder of your engine. If you have a faulty fuel system, obviously it's not going to run, but so every system that we're looking at is equally important to the running of your motors. So typically in a fuel system you're going to have a tank that's going to store that liquid fuel. Alright, comes in different shapes and sizes. Coming off the tank is going to be a tube, and in that tube is going to be a fuel filter of some kind attached between that. And if you have a fuel pump and it's not gravity fed, it'll be the filter will be before the pump. Okay. That makes sense, right? Because if you have any debris or anything like that, you don't want it entering into the pump because it'll seize your pump up. So if it has a fuel pump, its job is to distribute enough fuel through the correct pressure to get it to the carburetor. All right, fuel line. And then there's a picture of a carburetor. Carburetors come in a number of shapes and sizes. And it provides a fuel-air mixture, and it does so through what they call a Venturi system, which is essentially a vacuum. We're going to talk a little bit about that here in a minute. So here's a diagram of how it might typically be set up in a motor. So you got your tank, your fuel line, your filters here within the line. The pump is typically somewhere near the carburetor. Alright, so you got the carburetor itself. The carburetor body is this silver piece right here. Right, it's going to hold all the pieces that we're going to go through. You see this little flap-like thing? This is what's going to open and close to help create that vacuum. So there's a float and a needle, which is number 1 here, and it controls the amount of fuel that goes in. So as the chamber fills, it'll move up and closing it and then opening it when needed. So, okay. The pilot jet is right here. And it controls the amount of fuel when the engine is idle. That's that little black piece right there. There's also typically an emulsion tube, all right, which helps maintain the correct ratio of air to fuel without simply operating on one single vacuum principle. It helps create stability in the system. So. And then you've got what they call the main jet, which is number 6 here. It's just a little pin-like looking thing, and it controls the amount of fuel when the throttle is open. So there's a throttle body on there, and you can control how fast your engine is running based on where you have the throttle adjusted to. All right, so we're going to get into the ignition system, the electrical system. In the case of your motor, it is a magnetized system. You might have a starter in a vehicle that helps provide the spark to the spark plug. In this case, we have the armature and coil. So this is an armature. At the top, let's see. So this piece, if you look at it, this piece right here is what's going to go into your spark plug. That's your spark plug wire. And then you got this piece in here that can take that magnet energy and turn it into electrical energy. And you've got the armature piece right here that picks up the magnetic field from your flywheel. So you've got the spark plug here. That's what's causing the spark. Spark end is on this side, where the little gap is there. And then you've got what they call the rewind starter. That's a manual start. So you pull that piece there, and it helps turn the engine over. All right, so here is how this would work in the system. Again, you got your spark plug here. Your spark happens down here where there's a gap, and ignites this air fuel mixture that's in the cylinder. So, all right, flywheel. So this is something that sits on the crankshaft. There's a magnet on there, and every time it flips around and hits that armature, it creates a magnetic energy. So the magnet is required to create electrical energy for the spark plug. You have a keyway, which is right here. If you look at this flywheel here, there's like this dark thing that comes down into that center hole there. That's the flywheel keyway, and it will hold this key here, the next one on the list. So basically, it's kind of like a timing wheel. It helps to make sure that the spark is occurring at the proper intake valve positions. So it kind of operates a little bit like your timing gear, which is inside your crankcase. All right, so then you're going to have some cooling fins here. In terms of ours, we have plastic fins on the outside of ours, so that makes it a little bit more challenging to work with because you can wreck the cooling fins. You got to be careful. And that helps create some air movement around the engine there. So in essence, creating an air-cooled engine by covering that up, and I'll show you that a little bit later in that housing. So there's a magnet, and that goes once it goes near the armature. That's where all the fun happens. So cooling fins, magnet. This is the magneto-journal end of the crankshaft. Flywheel keyway, a little bit more up close and personal. And then, hold on here. There must be, if I remember correctly, that housing comes a little later after the lubrication system. So we'll talk about that again later. All right, so basically lubrication system is your oil system within your engine. All right, so you're going to have some form of a filter because you can always have things like metal shavings and or dirt that comes in, and you don't want any of that in your engine because just a little bit can create a lot of problems. So filters are always good things for that. Crankcase sump, that's going to be where part of the crankcase, and it's going to hold that oil when it's not being used in other parts. And in our case, it's extremely narrow compared to this one. It's just a cover that goes on there. Oil slinger. The job of an oil slinger, this is a picture of a oil slinger. Splashes oil up inside the crankcase of the engine. Typically, this works by spinning at the same time. Can act as a governor in certain engines. Now, the governor's job is to maintain the certain engine speed regardless of what the motor is doing. So if you're on a lawnmower and you're going uphill and you got or you're pulling a load and you've got more workload going on to that motor, the governor's job is to maintain that engine speed, okay, so that that you don't bog down necessarily. And also it's to maintain the correct speed. If you ever install the governor incorrectly when you are rebuilding the motor, you will know when you fire that puppy up because it'll sound like it's going to take off like a rocket. So the RPMs on the engine are going to increase dramatically. So it keeps it under control and it keeps it steady, which is what we want when we expect an engine to do work for us. All right, so that oil slinger is right over here in the corner. Crankshaft is right here, and that's within the sump there. All right, so that's crankcase. All right, so you've got an oil plug. Oil plug is the bottom right picture here. If you need to change the oil, that's typically what you open up versus taking the crankcase cover off. And then you can have a dipstick here to check to see how much oil is in the crankcase. You should do that regularly. You run out of engine oil because you have a leak somewhere or it's burning it up, you're going to seize your motor, and that's going to be the end of it. So that's how you break piston rings and throw a rod and all sorts of things. So oil, having the proper level of oil in your motor or engine is extremely important. All right, so air intake and exhaust. We're drawing air in. We're getting rid of impurities and combustible products. All right, so typically there's some form of an air filter, and that filters debris as it moves from the air as it moves into the engine. Again, same principle as the oil filter and the fuel filter. You have a muffler that will reduce the noise that an engine makes. And its job is also to reduce any spark potential in those exhaust gases. So it's got a couple different things. Very hot when the engine is running, so don't touch it. All right, blower housing. So this is where your cooling fins on your flywheel are. Okay, so it encompasses those fins and then directs that air to the cylinder block and the cylinder head. So this blower housing essentially takes when that flywheel is spinning and takes that air and moves it where it needs to go so it can properly cool things. So it's got pretty good, pretty important job. Even though it's just it looks like a shield basically. It's pretty important. And then there's a breather tube assembly that also helps direct air into the combustion chamber. So that's the operating on a vacuum type system again, and drawing that air in. And I believe that is it. All right. Don't forget that Monday we are starting in person, doing our teardown and rebuild. Have a good day and have a great weekend.